My wife sold my father's house behind my back while I was standing beside his hospital bed, holding his hand and pretending not to hear the machines counting down the end of his life. That is the part one will never forget. Not the papers. Not the forged signature. Not the stranger's name on the sale contract. The part that stayed with me was the timing. My father, Samuel Reed, had spent 40 years paying for that house brick by brick, overtime shift by overtime shift, repair by repair, until the mortgage finally died before he did. He used to say a man does not really own a home until the roof has seen him scared and kept him dry anyway. That house had seen everything. My first steps. My mother's funeral. My high school graduation. The night I came home after being stopped by police for no reason and my father sat with me on the porch until sunrise because anger had nowhere else to go. It was not a mansion. It was a narrow 2-story brick house on Alder Street with a leaning fence, a peach tree in the backyard, and a front porch my father rebuilt 3 times because he refused to pay anyone for work he could still do with his own hands. My name is Michael Reed. I am a black man, 41 years old, and I thought that house was the one thing in my life no one could take without looking me in the eye. I was wrong. Before we continue, tell me where you're watching from today, and if you believe some betrayals are not just about money but about erasing where a person came from, stay with this story until the end. My wife's name was Lauren. Lauren Whitaker before she married me. White, beautiful, elegant, and raised in a family where people spoke softly because money had already shouted for them. When we met, I was working as a city building inspector and renovating old homes on weekends. She was an interior designer who specialized in turning historic houses into spaces that looked old only where oldness was profitable. She loved my knowledge at first. She loved that I could walk through a building and hear problems in the floorboards. She loved that I knew how to restore plaster, repair brick, save original wood, and respect the work of hands that came before mine. She said I made houses feel alive. I should have noticed that she respected houses more easily than she respected the people who had survived inside them. Her family never liked me. Her father, Warren Whitaker, owned a real estate investment firm that bought properties in working-class neighborhoods and called displacement revitalization. At our first dinner, he asked me if I planned to remain a city employee forever, then laughed and said public service was admirable for people who did not mind ceilings. Lauren told me later he was only teasing. Her mother, Elise, asked whether my father's neighborhood was improving and whether the crime had gone down since new money started moving in. I told her people had lived there before money found it interesting. The table went quiet. Lauren squeezed my knee under the table, not in support, but warning. That was how our marriage would work in miniature. Someone would insult where I came from, I would answer calmly, and Lauren would treat my response as the problem. My father saw it before I did. He was polite to Lauren, always. Samuel Reed had old-school manners, the kind that made him stand when a woman entered a room even if that woman did not deserve his respect. But after our first Thanksgiving together, while Lauren helped my aunt in the kitchen and my cousins watched football, my father found me on the porch and said, "Son, that woman likes your strength, but I don't know if she respects what made you strong." I told him he was being unfair. He nodded and looked out at the street. Maybe. I hope I am. He was not. Over the years, Lauren grew tired of Alder Street. She called my father's house depressing. She said the neighborhood made her uncomfortable after dark, though she could never name a thing that had happened to her there. She hated that I spent Saturdays fixing his gutters, painting his trim, replacing loose boards, checking his furnace. "You're always running over there," she said. "He's my father. He owns a house. He can hire help. He raised me. I can show up." She rolled her eyes. "You act like loyalty is a full-time job." I should have known then that she saw love as something scheduled between more important obligations. When my father got sick, the house became even more important. It started with fatigue, then weight loss, then tests, then the word cancer spoken in a doctor's office with beige walls and no mercy. Pancreatic. Advanced. Treatment could slow it, maybe, but no one in the room knew how to say hope without lying. I drove him to appointments. I managed medications. I slept in the old recliner in his living room when chemo left him too weak to climb stairs. Lauren came twice in the first month, then stopped because, as she said, hospitals and illness triggered her anxiety. But she still found energy for client dinners, gallery openings, and lunches with her father. During those months, I fell behind on everything except care. Bills stacked. Work suffered. My supervisor warned me that I was burning through leave. My marriage became a hallway we passed through without speaking. Lauren said I was emotionally absent. I said my father was dying. She said, "He's not the only person in your life." I looked at her then and saw something cold behind the tears. Not grief. Competition. As if my father's illness had stolen attention she believed belonged to her. The first time she mentioned selling the house, my father was still alive. We were in our kitchen late at night, and she had a glass of wine in her hand. "Michael," she said carefully, "have you thought about what happens to your father's house?" "What do you mean?" "After." I stared at her. "After he dies?" She looked away. "We have to be practical. He's still breathing, Lauren." "I know that. Don't make me sound cruel." I laughed once, not because it was funny, but because the sentence had arrived too late. "The house stays in the family." Her jaw tightened. "For what? Sentiment? That area is changing. My father says values are peaking. If we wait too long, you could lose a real opportunity. My father's house is not an opportunity. Everything is an opportunity if you're not afraid to be honest about money." I stood from the table. Conversation over. She followed me into the hall. "You always do this. You turn every financial decision into some emotional tribute to where you came from." I turned back. "Because where I came from is not a stain I'm trying to wash off." She looked exhausted. "No one said it was. Your family says it every time they open their mouths." "There it is again," she snapped. "Everything is about race. Everything is about class. Everything is about your father's pride. Maybe because your family keeps trying to buy the ground from under people and call it improvement." She went silent then, but not because she understood. Because she was planning. My father died on a Sunday afternoon in late October. The leaves outside his hospital window were copper and gold, too beautiful for the moment. He had been drifting in and out for 2 days. Near the end, he opened his eyes and asked if the peach tree had produced that year. I told him yes, though birds had gotten most of them. He smiled weakly and said, "Birds got rights too." That was my father. Even at the end, making room for something hungry. His last clear words to me were about the house. "Don't let them make you sell just because they can't see what it is." I held his hand and promised. His fingers relaxed a little after that, like the promise had weight enough for him to rest on. 3 days later, while I was arranging the funeral, Lauren sold the house. I did not know it then. That is the nature of certain betrayals. While you are grieving, someone else is signing. The funeral was small but full. Neighbors came. Old co-workers from the transit authority came. Men who had once played cards with my father came in suits that did not quite fit anymore. My father's barber closed his shop for the morning. Lauren attended in black, stood beside me, touched my arm at the right moments, and accepted condolences like a woman performing a role she had studied. Her father came too, which surprised me. Warren Whitaker shook my hand and said, "Your father was obviously very important to you." Obviously. As if love were an observable habit he did not personally understand. After the burial, I went back to my father's house alone. I sat on the porch steps until evening, remembering him sanding boards there, drinking coffee there, teaching me how to sharpen a chisel there. I did not know that the house already had a buyer. I did not know that Lauren had used a durable power of attorney form my father had signed years earlier for medical emergencies and altered attached property documents with help from someone in her father's office. I did not know that she had represented herself as authorized to sell on behalf of the estate. I did not know that my signature had been copied from an old tax form and placed on preliminary consent paperwork. I only knew grief, and grief is loud enough to drown alarms. The truth began with a locksmith. 2 weeks after the funeral, I drove to Alder Street to clean out my father's bedroom. His flannel shirt still hung in the closet. His Bible was on the nightstand. I had promised myself I would take one room at a time. But when I arrived, a white van was parked outside and a man in work pants was changing the front lock. For a moment, I thought I had the wrong house. Then I saw the peach tree. I got out of the car slowly. "Can I help you?" the locksmith asked. "What are you doing?" "Changing locks for the new owner." The words did not make sense. "There is no new owner." He looked uncomfortable. "Sir, I just have a work order." "Who ordered it?" He checked his phone. "Buyer's rep, Northline Heritage Properties." I had never heard the name. "This is my father's house." The locksmith stepped back, sensing the ground beneath him was not solid. "I'm sorry. I was told it closed yesterday." "Closed?" The word hit me like a door slamming from inside. I called Lauren. She did not answer. I called again. Then again. Finally she texted, "I'm in a meeting." I typed, "Did you sell my father's house?" The message showed delivered. Then read. No answer. That was the answer. I drove home so fast I barely remember traffic. Lauren's car was in the driveway. When I walked in, she was standing in the living room with her phone in her hand, pale but composed, like she had been rehearsing. "Michael," she said, "please let me explain." I closed the door behind me. "You sold it. We were going to lose money if we waited. You sold my dead father's house 2 weeks after his funeral. I handled something you were too emotional to handle." The room went still. Something inside me went quiet in a way that scared even me. "How?" I asked. "How did you sell a house that was not yours?" She swallowed. "Your father had signed authorization paperwork years ago. For medical decisions. The estate process is complicated. Do not talk to me like I'm stupid." Her face hardened then, because guilt had run out and pride was stepping in. "Fine. My father's office helped structure the sale. Everything was going to come to you anyway, Michael. We just expedited it." "Who is we?" "Don't do that." "Who is we?" She folded her arms. "My father knew a buyer. A preservation group. They made a strong offer." "How much?" She told me. I laughed, and the sound was ugly. The number was high enough to tempt someone who saw only money and low enough to prove they knew exactly what they were stealing. "That house is worth more than that." "Not in its current condition." "Its current condition is my father's life." She rolled her eyes. "That is what ended the marriage. Not the sale. Not the forgery I would later prove." That eye roll. "My father reduced to an inconvenience in a financial disagreement." "You need to leave," I said. She blinked. "Excuse me?" "Leave this house." "This is my home too." "Then pack for tonight and call your lawyer tomorrow." She stared at me. "You're being irrational." "No. I am being very rational. That's why you should go before I become honest." She left an hour later. The next morning, I hired an attorney named Elaine Porter, a white woman in her 60s who had handled property fraud cases for half the city and had a reputation for making arrogant people regret writing emails. I brought her everything I had: my father's will, the old medical power of attorney, texts from Lauren, estate documents, and the buyer information from the locksmith. Elaine read in silence for nearly 30 minutes. Then she removed her glasses. "Your wife had no authority to sell this house." I closed my eyes. "Can we reverse it?" "Possibly. But it depends on the buyer's knowledge, the title company's review, and how the documents were presented." If the buyer acted in good faith, unwinding may be harder, though fraud changes the equation. Who is Northline Heritage Properties? Elaine clicked through a database on her laptop. Small LLC. Formed 8 months ago. Registered agent is a law office downtown. Beneficial ownership hidden behind another entity. She paused. Interesting. What? The buyer may not be who your wife thinks it is. I did not understand that sentence until a week later, when the buyer requested to meet me. Elaine advised caution. We met in her office, not at the house. I expected a developer. I expected one of Warren's friends. I expected some slick man in a suit who would talk about revitalization and market realities while sitting on my father's porch in his imagination. Instead, a white woman in her late 50s walked in carrying a canvas tote and a folder stuffed with papers. Her name was Margaret Ellis. She wore no jewelry except a plain wedding band and spoke with the careful directness of someone who knew the room had reason not to trust her. Mr. Reed, she said, I owe you an explanation. I did not shake her hand. You bought my father's house. Yes. Behind my back. She looked down briefly. I bought it through an estate sale represented as fully authorized by your wife and her father's legal office. I did not know you objected. I did not know your signature was questionable. And I did not know who your father was until after closing. Elaine leaned forward. Who is Samuel Reed to you, Ms. Ellis? Margaret opened her folder. Inside was a black and white photograph of my father as a young man, standing beside a group of construction workers in front of a half-built school. I stared at it. I had never seen the photo before. My father looked maybe 26, lean, serious, wearing work boots and holding a lunch pail. Margaret tapped the image gently. My father is the man beside him. Thomas Ellis. They worked together in 1978 on the Westbrook School expansion. I looked closer. A white man stood beside my father, one hand on his shoulder, both of them squinting into the sun. I don't understand. Margaret took a breath. My father died last year. After he passed, I found journals. In them, he wrote about Samuel Reed many times. Your father protected him during a violent labor dispute. More than that, he helped him expose wage theft involving black workers on city projects. My father said Samuel had evidence that could have changed several families' lives, but the case was buried after political pressure. He always regretted not doing more. The room felt suddenly too small. My father had never told me this. Not fully. He had told stories about unfair bosses, missing pay, men being cheated, but never a case. Never evidence. Margaret continued. I started researching properties connected to the workers from that time. I wanted to create a historical archive and possibly restore one house as a community legal center focused on labor rights. When your father's house came up quietly through Northline, and I saw the name Samuel Reed in the packet, I thought it was fate. I almost laughed. Fate had terrible manners. You bought my house to honor my father? I bought it because I believed the family was selling willingly and because I thought I could preserve his story. Her voice tightened. Then I found a box hidden under loose flooring in the pantry. My body went still. What box? She pulled several scanned pages from her folder. Old pay records. Worker statements. Letters. Photographs. A notebook in your father's handwriting. Mr. Reed, your father kept evidence that a group of city contractors and officials stole wages from black laborers for years, then used intimidation to silence them. Some of the families involved are still in this city. Some companies connected to those contractors still exist. Elaine looked at me sharply. May I see those? Margaret slid them across the table. I saw my father's handwriting immediately. Strong, slanted, precise. Names. Dates. Hours worked. Wages paid. Wages owed. Notes about threats. Notes about a white foreman who warned him that men like you should be grateful for work, not asking questions. My throat closed. My father had spent his life teaching me not to let anyone erase me, and all that time he had been carrying proof of erasure inside his own walls. Margaret's voice softened. There is something else. I looked up. She placed one final page on the table. It was a recent email chain between Warren Whitaker and the title liaison. Elaine read it first. Her face changed. Michael, she said quietly, you need to see this. The email was from Warren to someone named Paul at the title company. It said, daughter confirms husband is too emotionally compromised to interfere. Push close before estate review. Buyer doesn't need family complications. Use existing consent signature. If challenged, we frame it as a grieving son regretting a practical sale. I read it again. Then again. Warren had known. Lauren had known. They were not careless. They were strategic. Margaret looked horrified. I received this anonymously 2 days after closing. I think someone at the title company realized what happened. Elaine gathered the papers slowly. Ms. Ellis, are you willing to cooperate in legal action? Margaret answered without hesitation. Yes. And if Mr. Reed wants the sale reversed, I will cooperate with that too. I looked at her then. For the first time since the locksmith, the buyer was not a thief in my mind. She was a door I had not expected. You would give it back? It was never supposed to be taken from you. That sentence nearly broke me. The legal fight began immediately. Elaine filed to freeze the deed transfer, challenge the sale, and investigate fraud. Warren responded with arrogance first. His attorney sent letters calling my claims emotional, inflammatory, and unsupported. Then Elaine produced the email. The tone changed. Lauren called me that night. I did not answer. She left a voicemail, crying. Michael, my father handled most of it. I know I made mistakes, but I thought we were doing what was best. You were drowning in grief. I was trying to protect our future. I replayed the message once and deleted it. Protect our future. People love including you in the word "our" after they have already acted alone. Discovery exposed more. Warren had arranged a discounted sale to Margaret's LLC because he believed she was merely a preservation buyer who would not aggressively question title documents. His real plan was uglier. He had a side agreement with an affiliated developer to purchase adjacent lots and later pressure Margaret to sell or partner once the property value rose through historic designation. My father's house was not the prize alone. It was the anchor for a larger redevelopment play. Lauren had helped because Warren promised her a share of future profits through a trust. My marriage had been traded for a percentage of land my father had died asking me not to lose. When Elaine showed me the trust documents, I sat in her office without speaking. She gave me time. Good lawyers know when silence is not emptiness but containment. I want everything public, I said finally. Elaine nodded. That will make the divorce harder. Good. The divorce filing came from Lauren 2 days later, accusing me of hostility, emotional cruelty, and financial irresponsibility. She claimed I had become obsessed with my father's house and that my refusal to accept a beneficial sale showed instability. Elaine read the filing and smiled in a way that reminded me of thunder far away. She used the word unstable 4 times, she said. That usually means they need you to look dangerous because the facts make them look guilty. The court hearings were brutal. Warren sat behind Lauren in expensive suits, glaring like a man offended that consequences had entered a room without knocking. Lauren cried beautifully. She said I had shut her out during my father's illness. She said she was lonely. She said she had made a difficult decision under pressure. Then Elaine projected Warren's email on the courtroom screen. Daughter confirms husband is too emotionally compromised to interfere. Push close before estate review. Lauren stopped crying. The judge, a white man named Henry Lawson, stared at the screen for a long time. Mrs. Reed, he said, did you authorize your father to communicate this? Lauren's attorney stood. Your Honor, my client, the judge raised a hand. I asked Mrs. Reed. Lauren's mouth trembled. I knew he was helping with the sale. Did you know your husband's consent signature was being used without direct confirmation? She looked at me then. Not with love. Not even with guilt. With resentment that I had forced the truth into a place where it could not be managed privately. I thought Michael would eventually understand. That sentence echoed through the courtroom like a confession wearing perfume. Margaret testified too. She explained why she bought the house, what she found, and how she contacted me after realizing the sale was tainted. Warren's attorney tried to paint her as naive, but Margaret did not bend. I may have been naive, she said. But I was not dishonest. There is a difference. The judge voided the sale pending full title review, froze proceeds, and referred the forged documents to prosecutors. Warren's firm came under investigation. The title company settled quickly and cooperated. Lauren's claim to any proceeds collapsed. The divorce shifted from marital dissolution to damage control. But the biggest revelation came from my father's hidden box. Margaret and I went to the house together after the court granted supervised access. The locks had been changed back. I stood in the doorway for several minutes before entering. The air smelled stale, but beneath it was the old smell of wood, dust, and the faint sweetness of the peach tree through the kitchen window. Margaret showed me the pantry floorboard. Underneath was a cavity wrapped in plastic sheeting. My father had hidden the box well. Inside were more documents than I expected: wage logs, photographs, names of workers, signed statements, letters to city officials, and one cassette tape labeled Meeting with WB 1979. We had it digitized. On the recording, my father's voice was younger but unmistakable. Calm. Firm. He confronted a contractor about missing wages owed to black workers on several city-funded projects. The contractor laughed and said, "Sam, you're smart, but don't confuse yourself with somebody important." My father answered, "Important is not the same as powerful. You'll learn that when the truth gets patient." I listened to that line in Elaine's conference room and cried in front of people without caring. My father had been patient for 40 years. The truth had waited under his pantry floor until the woman who betrayed me accidentally sold the house to the one buyer willing to open the box. The historical archive became a legal matter, then a public one. Local journalists uncovered connections between the old wage theft scheme and several surviving real estate families, including an early company tied to Warren Whitaker's father. That was the part Warren had not known. Or maybe he had and thought it buried. His family had profited from city contracts where workers like my father were underpaid, and decades later, Warren tried to profit again by taking the house where the evidence was hidden. History does not repeat exactly. Sometimes it circles back for documents. The scandal broke wide open. City labor theft records found in disputed home sale. Historic black neighborhood targeted by developer tied to old contracting abuses. Warren resigned from 2 boards. His firm lost a major city redevelopment bid. Prosecutors charged one of his associates for document fraud in the sale. Warren avoided prison through a plea tied to cooperation in fines, which angered me until Elaine reminded me that wealthy men often fall sideways. But he did fall. His name became attached to the very word he had spent a lifetime avoiding: fraud. Lauren came to the house once before the divorce finalized. I found her standing by the peach tree, crying. I almost told her to leave. Instead, I waited. She turned when she heard me. "I didn't know about the box," she said. "I believe that. I didn't know my father's family was connected to what happened back then. I believe that too." She wiped her face. "But I knew enough." That surprised me. She looked toward the house. "I knew you loved this place. I knew your father asked you to keep it. I knew the signature wasn't right. I knew my father wanted to close before you could think clearly. I told myself it was practical because practical sounds better than cruel." I said nothing. "I was ashamed of this house," she admitted. of the neighborhood, of how much it meant to you. I wanted you free from it, but really I wanted myself free from being married to a man whose roots made my family uncomfortable. The wind moved through the peach leaves behind her. Late fruit hung from the branches, small and gold. Thank you for telling the truth, I said. Tears fell again. Do you hate me? No. She looked relieved too quickly. But I don't want you in my life. The relief vanished. Michael, you sold my father's house while I was burying him. There is no version of sorry that turns that into something I can live beside. She covered her mouth. I know. I hope you do. The divorce finalized with the house fully restored to me, Lauren waiving claims connected to it and paying part of the legal fees through her share of marital assets. I did not celebrate. Winning back what should never have been stolen feels different from gaining something new. It feels like returning a bone to a body and still remembering the break. Margaret and I became unlikely partners. She helped establish the Samuel Reed Labor Archive using the documents from the house and her father's journals. We converted the first floor into a community legal and history center, not by selling the property, but by placing it into a family trust that allowed me to live upstairs when I wanted and operate the center below. The front room became a reading room. The dining room became a legal clinic twice a week. The pantry floorboard stayed open under glass, with a small plaque explaining what had been hidden there. My father's porch became a place where elders told stories to students who had never heard that black workers built half the city while being cheated out of wages and credit. At the opening ceremony, I stood on the steps where my father had taught me how to sandwood and looked out at neighbors, lawyers, historians, former laborers' children, journalists, and people who had come because the truth had finally become loud enough to find them. Margaret spoke first. She talked about her father's regret and my father's courage. Then I spoke. I had no notes. I did not need them. My father was not famous, I said. He did not have a building named after him. He did not sit on boards or attend galas. He worked. He paid his mortgage. He fixed his porch. He helped neighbors. And quietly, when powerful people stole from men like him, he wrote it down. He believed that if the truth could not win immediately, it could at least survive. People were silent. This house was almost taken because someone thought grief made me weak. But grief is not weakness. Grief is love with nowhere to go. My father gave mine somewhere to stand. I looked at the porch beneath my feet. Today, this is still his house. But it is also proof that homes remember, paper remembers, neighborhoods remember, and sometimes the thing people try to steal becomes the thing that exposes them. The applause came slowly, then stronger. Miss Ruth from next door cried openly. A former worker's grandson hugged me and said his family had never known why his grandfather left construction. A law student asked to volunteer at the clinic. Margaret stood beside the peach tree, smiling through tears. That night, after everyone left, I sat alone on the porch. The house was quiet behind me, but not empty. My father's tools were still in the basement. His Bible was still on the shelf. His handwriting was now preserved in archival sleeves downstairs. The peach tree moved gently in the dark. I thought about Warren, the forged papers, the locksmith, the buyer who revealed everything, and the strange path Truth had taken to get home. If Lauren had not sold the house, Margaret might never have found the box. If Margaret had not cared about history, the documents might have stayed hidden until rot or renovation destroyed them. If my father had not written everything down, powerful families would have continued pretending their wealth had no ghosts. Life is not fair, but sometimes it is precise. Months later, I received a letter from Lauren. She had moved out of state. She wrote that she was working with a therapist, that she had cut contact with her father for the first time in her life, that she had started volunteering with a housing justice group and was learning how often people like her used the word practical when they meant profitable. She did not ask me to respond. I appreciated that. At the end, she wrote, "Your father understood legacy better than anyone in my family ever did." I folded the letter and placed it in a file. Not with my father's papers. She had no place there. but not in the trash either. Some apologies do not deserve a home, but they can be acknowledged as weather that has passed. Years later, people still tell the story as if the buyer was the twist. My wife sold my father's house behind my back, then the buyer revealed everything. That is true, but incomplete. Margaret revealed the box. The box revealed the crime. The crime revealed the history. The history revealed my father. Not the man I thought I knew, because I knew his kindness, his discipline, his humor, his stubbornness, his love. But the part he had carried silently so I could inherit more than pain. He had preserved evidence not for revenge, but for a day when someone might be strong enough, connected enough, or lucky enough to make use of it. I became that someone only because betrayal brought me back to the floorboards. My wife thought she was selling an old house before grief made me difficult. Warren thought he was securing land before value rose. The title company thought one more rushed closing would disappear into paperwork. But my father's house was never just property. It was a witness. It had listened. It had held. It had waited. And when the wrong people tried to take it, the house did what my father had taught it to do. It told the truth.